Good morning everyone, and welcome to this week's Live Without Limits from a very foggy day just outside Stafford. This week we're thinking about what it means to forgive without limits, to forgive without limits. Jesus says this in Matthew 18 verses 21 to 22. Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. How often should you forgive someone if they sin against you, if they do something wrong to you? Well, Jesus says, not as many times as you think, but 10 times more than that. Forgive them as often as they do it. I think sometimes we misunderstand what forgiveness is. If you're on the Online Pastor Facebook group, I hope you watched Christopher's testimony that he posted last week at the weekend. It was brilliant, and if you haven't watched it, please go and do it. It's just a wonderful story of how God has worked through his life. But one of the things he talks about is having to forgive someone who really had hurt him in quite a serious way. And he says one of the things he had to learn was that forgiveness doesn't mean saying that what they did was right. It doesn't mean saying that what they did doesn't matter. It doesn't mean saying it's fine, we can pretend it didn't happen. Forgiveness is about dealing with something that was wrong. When somebody has sinned against you, they have done something wrong. And it's about how you respond to that. Forgiveness is about saying, I'm not going to hold on to the anger that it's made me feel. I'm not going to seek revenge for what you've done. It's about saying, do you know what, it even may be possible for us to rebuild some kind of relationship despite what you've done to me. So when Jesus tells Peter that he should forgive 77 times, he goes on to tell him a parable to explain what that forgiveness would look like. So this is the parable from Matthew 18, starting at verse 23. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, cancelled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I cancelled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you, unless you forgive your brother from your heart. You see, the first servant was forgiven so much, and yet he couldn't bring himself to forgive just that small debt. It's the same with us, isn't it, as Christians? God forgives us all day, every day. That's the point of Christianity. It's all about grace. It is founded on God's forgiveness. And that's what Jesus says. If you are finding it hard to forgive someone, remember how much you have been forgiven. If you're finding it hard to forgive someone, remember how much you have been forgiven. I want to just end by reading a story from a newspaper. This happened a year or so ago. The court heard how Simeon Scott Vesey, 25, pulled up in a taxi by a baseball court near Earlsfield Station when Nicholas Stewart was playing. Scott Vasey, who has a long criminal record, mostly for robbery, and had undergone years of treatment for mental illness, stormed over with a knife and stabbed Mr. Stewart, 25, to death. The court heard he had stopped taking medication for schizophrenia 3 months before the killing, on August the 13th last year. The jury rejected his defence that he was guilty only of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility and convicted him of murder. Last week, Judge Rebecca Poulet sentenced him to a minimum of 28 years. Mr. Stewart's mother attended every day of the trial and was in tears after the verdict. In an impact statement read to the court, she said, "This has been the most horrific ordeal of my life. I feel my son has been butchered. He bled to death, and there was nothing I could do to comfort him." That is not someone pretending that it didn't matter that her son was killed. That is not someone saying it was okay. But listen to what she says next. "I take comfort in God and feel forgiveness for Scott Vasey, because that is what my faith teaches me, although that does not diminish the loss I feel every day. My faith in God is keeping me sane, but I know that my faith will not bring back my beloved son." Forgiveness doesn't put everything right. It can't make it like it was before. It can't bring back her son. But forgiveness is where she's able to find comfort in her faith and hope for the future.